if there's one thing that COVID did give us, it was that chance to take pause, I think, and to really reflect on the way that we travel. So one of the questions we're going to be looking at today is, as we come out of COVID into a post-pandemic world, how can we be more conscious travelers? How can we honor the places we visit? How can we figure ethics into the way that we travel and reconnect with the land? I do think, though, that to dovetail into the first section about the way that we think about travel and our approach to it, the travel has certainly changed a lot over the past several decades and even in the past few years. And I think it continues to change. We're at a real inflection point at the moment, as I said, with COVID and things like that. But I want to put it to the panel and ask, what are the biggest changes that you've observed with regards to travel in the last 10 years? And maybe I'll throw this one to Sing, maybe to kick things off. I understand you've done a lot of traveling in your time. You've been to something like more than 80 countries through the course of your work and as a documentary filmmaker and things like that. So if you could just kind of talk about that a little bit and the way that, what your experience has been about the way that travel's changed over the past, say, 10 years, where it's come from and where you think it's going.
I can say that before, about 10 years ago, when I was just traveling for leisure with my family and stuff, we rely a lot on tour organizers to buy tour package or some kind of professional who can help us to get to a certain country. Information about each places are quite scarce. You cannot just, like, if you want to go to India, you cannot just look online and anything. You have to have someone who have contacts there and ask the local and stuff like that. So
buy a book.
Yeah,
Lonely
buy
Planet.
a book, Lonely Planet, prepare yourself in advance. And the organization part is definitely more. Right now, you can just drop yourself in anywhere and look in your phone and find places to go. So it's much more spontaneous. And there are a lot more solo travelers these days. When I started off doing my show, I was like, the selling point of the show was being a solo traveler in strange land. That was only like 6 years ago. And now a lot of people is doing it in Thailand as well. So it's become something much more normal to have stuff like travel bloggers, influencers, travel, and things like that, which doesn't exist 10 years ago at all. And young people right now, they don't want to travel according to any particular program that's been set by a tour. They only do that if they have to go with their families. And it's also open more space and more channels for more niche market of traveling that you cannot find before when you need to buy a more mass-produced package in terms of tourism. And right now, a lot of I've been, like you have mentioned, I've been around a lot, and I found that there are many tailor-made tours for almost everybody. And for me, I try to go to more underground places and war zone and places good for doing documentaries, right? You guys advice know how it is. And it's quite easy to find contact these days. So I would say it's getting much easier, but on the same time, on the other side, I found that with the rise of social media, people are much less involved in their experience when I get there. A lot of cameras everywhere, and traveling now taking photos and video has become a thing you go to do instead of being a side activities that you do along the way.
Ronald, maybe I'll pass to you. I'm sure you've seen, you've kind of been at the front line of this in an establishment as famous and as well known as Potato Head. That's quite a heritage brand, I guess, and would have seen a lot of change from there on the front line over the past 10 years. What are some of the ways that you've seen the patterns of tourism change and the attitudes of people who come and visit Bali and I guess your area specifically?
Hey guys, nice to meet everyone here and the panelists and everyone's here. I mean, I share the same. I grew up all my life traveling. Like, I mean, I'm just like my family's business. I grew was a travel agency, and my first job was a tour leader in Hawaii. Actually, I was I spent my teenage years in Hawaii, and that was my first job at right after high school. So I see it firsthand. Before, traveling was such a big bucket list in people's life. For someone to go to the States for the first time, for someone to see Europe for the first time. And there's a lot of shift for the past 10 years. I mean, like the clear shift was people start to travel, people can afford to travel more, but people also start to travel just as a form of a quick escape. It's so cheap to travel to a new destination, and some people just go take it to their bucket list, that you go there, you shot the Eiffel Tower, you shot this, you shot this, you shot this, post it in your social media, and you go home, right? It's much more less immersive, like you said earlier. But I could also see the shift in the younger generation now, especially post-pandemic. People are starting to spend their income rather than buying things, but collecting experiences. And those are much more meaningful experiences. Like you said earlier, I see a lot of more a new breed of traveler coming from the younger generation. Ones that's more into exploring, ones that's more into taking it as an adventure rather than just another ticking the box.
Kyle, I'm interested to hear your thoughts here. You run the Detours project in Hawaii, which is about the decolonial political education and essentially challenging that classic external image of Hawaii as this kind of tropical paradise, and the way that actually, in fact, ignores the ongoing US imperialism of Hawaii. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that and how that way of traveling and seeing foreign countries as just kind of experiences to be pocketed, essentially, or boxes to be ticked, how that can cause harm.
You know, I think that there's a tension between this desire to learn and grow through travel and a desire to consume experiences, to collect them. And we see the extreme expression of that with this kind of the selfie trophies that are taken all sorts of places. In Hawaii, where we see the cost of that is people will disregard prohibitions on certain trails and so forth, and they get into trouble. They'll be trespassing in order to get to a really a site that's advertised on social media, and so they're causing all kinds of tensions within the community because they see it as something that is accessible to them. It becomes so easy to get to. You can Google map it and find it and get to it, and I think that that's causing a lot of harm in our environment and also in our communities. Project is not really about promoting tourism per se, but we started out as doing political education for folks who are coming to Hawaii as activists or as scholars, and we wanted them to understand this context before we could have conversations about how to be responsible here. And so I think that was maybe the sense of responsibilities and relationships as being another aspect of travel that needs to balance the sense that traveling can be a kind of an experience that can be consumed. That notion that travel is a kind of a consumptive activity is what I think is problematic, at least in Hawaii, where we see an extreme case of that, right? Hawaii is already represented to the world as this kind of exotic destination that's there. It's beautiful. It's beaches and sun, and so their minds are already sort of made up about what Hawaii is. It's a place for them, as opposed to a place that you're coming into someone's house, and that your presence there has impacts. And so you should come with a sense of protocol and responsibility. And this is something that comes out of, I think, some of my work in the Pacific with other activists. Is when you go to another place, you announce yourself, you announce your intentions. You bring something, you bring gifts, and you bring a sense of commitment to helping the people in that community with whatever the struggles are or whatever the issues that they're dealing with. So how do we foster that sense of responsibility as the main basis for why and how we travel, as opposed to just collecting, a bucket list, as you say.
And Deborah, what is your experience with this? In a place like Samoa, which I imagine it faces similar challenges in terms of that kind of postcard perception of the popular imagination, and having to kind of confront those challenges of these people coming in and seeing it as their kind of rumpus room and their just vacation spot, when in fact these are places where obviously these are homes to people, and that doesn't often figure in the minds of tourists so much.
Yes, I think a lot of people see the Pacific in general, I guess, as, paradise. It's a tropical place to, run away for when it's winter, when it's just, that time of the year that you have to get away from a lot of things, and bucket list, as a lot of you said. But from my experiences, although tourist does bring a lot of negative impacts, it also brings a lot of benefits for the country through the economy. But economy would not thrive if we do not have a country. So if we lose our lands, we lose our home, then there's no use to get money to build, what we call Samoa now, if we lose our homes. So for us, it'll be nice for tourists to come in and look more into going to ecotourism. You go look at museums, you go hiking up, natural, or more of eco-friendly stuff. So you get to be involved, and also, so if you come to Samoa and there's activities such as the Red Cross, we do a lot of those nature-based solutions and all that small greening activities. So as a tourist, you can also look up these activities and come and see how you can participate, you see how you can join, and just, contribute to local communities and how we can kind of fight against these climate change impacts. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a nice point to kind of pivot here into the impacts of travel and the economy of tourism. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. With the kind of halting of commercial flights and the environmental wins of that touted kind of during the pandemic and the way that that's played out, what kind of reprieve have you seen, or what reprieve realistically do you think is actually happening on the ground in, for example, the Philippines, where you live and work?
From my experience on the ground, unfortunately, I will have to say and debunk the idea that it has been good for the environment. In the last year and a half since the pandemic started and since tourism operations halted, we have experienced so much environmental opportunism, largely because all of these remote locations that used to have a bit of visibility and people going into them no longer have that visibility, right? So we found, for instance, last year, 6 large-scale land grabbers that we had to deal with. 4 of them supported actually by airing police officials, all of these things that actually do significant damage to ecosystems and area-based conservation on the ground. So it has been actually a very challenging year.
And are there ways in which the lack of tourism in the Philippines has reaped benefits? Are there ways in which that reprieve has been beneficial to the local environment or to local communities?
You can say that it has given some sites that have been bearing the brunt of mass tourism a bit of a breather, but it has been going on for a year and a half already, right? In the Philippines, the quarantine duration has been long. It's not just international travel that's been affected, even local movement has been severely affected. So instead, what you have is the multiplier effect of tourism that used to be there disappearing, and a lot of people ending up jobless and reverting back to practices that are even more environmentally unsustainable, such as timber poaching, just going deep into forest areas to distance themselves from the pandemic. So all of these unregulated developments, because even enforcement can't catch up, given restrictions in movement.
Maria, what has your experience been of this in places like Thailand? And I guess I'm interested in what both Deborah and Anne have mentioned in terms of the way that local communities rely on tourism in order for the economy, or the way that the economy is bolstered by tourism, and what happens when that is kind of pulled out by something like a global pandemic, or when that essentially is taken out of the picture, and the way that those countries and economies deal with that.
Yeah, in Thailand, we really rely on tourism. From this pandemic, I think a lot of us really, especially the local communities, have sort of shifted our focus and our sort of value on tourism, and realize how much we actually depend on foreigners coming into Thailand, and sort of shifting our focus and realizing that we have to be more sustainable. Although a lot of people here also feel like the fact that we have the lockdowns, the environment has gotten a chance to sort of have a breather. What we do see actually is a huge problem with trash. A lot of people are home and ordering in. This is a really new normal that we have here. It's like this ordering culture where no one's going out to buy their own food or cook themselves, but ordering. And with this ordering, so much trash comes with it. Also, even going out to restaurants, they don't accept, your glasses anymore. Everything is single-use plastic. And even Pising has a lot of experience as well, actually, with going into communities, helping with COVID, and just, with the PPE outfits and just changing all of these outfits every day. For each house, you need a new one as well. So the biggest thing that I've seen here right now is the multiplication of trash that we see around, which is already quite a big issue in Thailand as it is.
Yeah, and to add on what Maria said, some provinces in Thailand depend entirely on tourism, and we have seen an entire economy collapse, like entire economy. Nobody had jobs. A huge mega shopping mall closed down. I'm sure you guys have heard about Phuket, right? Maybe you have heard the names of the island. Yeah, it's entirely a ghost town right now. And one of the facts that nobody have seen in mass media is, yes, we do have a big sex worker industry in Thailand, and most of the customers are foreign men. And right now, about 200,000 of undocumented illegal worker is out of work without any welfare, without any place in the system at all. And yeah, so a lot of snowball effects coming from this. There's too much dependency on tourism in Thailand.
I'd actually like to add something to that too. Especially since we belong to ecotourism and we operate in places that typically wouldn't have any other industry but tourism, right? You can see that the impact has really affected a lot of people belonging to vulnerable circles and groups. So undocumented immigrants, yes. Tourism is probably the industry that employs a lot of women. A lot of women are affected. The same for youth, the same for indigenous groups that used to rely on it. So really quite devastating considering the lack of other industries that could actually be explored for these locations. And a lot are actually caught off guard.
Ronald, in terms of pollution and the effects of that and how that figures into tourism as an impact, you're involved with an initiative that takes plastic pollution and repurposes it for things like furniture. What can you tell me about the kind of how serious the impact of tourism is in terms of pollution and how we can address that in kind of innovative solutions such as the ones that you're involved with?
I started the company 10 years ago. And when we first started, we didn't even think about the environment. Back then, the awareness was just like about environment, about issues on climate change was still very little in Bali, right? And as years gone by, there was just like one moment for me where I couldn't turn around anymore. I think it was 5 to 6. Well, it's 6 years now since we skipped last year. It's been 6 years now, where I took my first son out, Noah, for a surf, and we were 500 meters out in the ocean. And we were still surrounded by trash. By trash, I meant it was not even just a little bit of trash. We were like swimming in the wave pool of trash. And so the first thing we did was, this was 6 years ago, we really tried to embrace this idea of regenerative hospitality with 3 key objectives for us. 1, we want to go closed loop operation. We want to go zero waste. And we're going to try to aim to go for zero waste. Second, we want to one thing that we do, we live and breathe out of creativity. That's what we do. That's why we're doing our business. That's what keeps us going. And that's what's fun for us. So we want to make it this idea of beautiful, sustainable. We feel that it's easier for people to choose a more sustainable option when they don't really have to compromise. we start setting goals. We make the commitment with the UN that we're going to go carbon neutral in 2 years. We start setting goal in terms of our recycling, both organic and non-organic.
Yeah, nailed. Thank you. Carl, I'm interested to get your perspective on this. We've just heard there about how serious the kind of pollution problem can be in some of these tourist hotspots. And ecotourism is often kind of touted as this solution to some of those problems. I mean, just to get your perspective on whether that alone is in fact an effective solution to a lot of the ecological problems that are associated with tourism.
In terms of the ecotourism, I don't know that, I think we have some that are doing probably better, more responsible kinds of activities, but some of it is just greening of their image, where they'll take a group out to an area, drop them off, and then they go on a hike without much support, without much instruction, or, helping them to be more responsible when they go into that forest or whatever. And so people get in trouble sometimes, right? And so I think that in some ways I don't know, I feel sort of critical of the do-it-yourself ethos taken to the extreme, where it's like people are not bound by any sort of sense of responsibilities to the place or to the communities where they are. And so that's when they get into trouble. That's when there's certain negative impacts. And then we're seeing a backlash. We're seeing people wanting to block roads and keep people out of certain areas because they're feeling inundated by these tourists. And the other thing about what happened after the COVID pandemic sort of lifted some of the travel, it seemed to unleash the worst kind of behaviors from certain visitors, right? Because of all their pent up desires that were frustrated, now they came and they acted as if, Hawaii was here for them, and don't you tell me to wear a mask and all of this sort of thing. And all these videos are popping up on social media showing, I think it's just revealing what had already been there, but the pandemic just sort of accentuated some of these contradictions. So, we need to sort of think about, okay, well, what is over-tourism? That's one conversation that's been happening in Hawaii, and what is the right size, and how do we set limits on that? The other thing that happens besides the corporate tourism, hotels and so forth, there's also, the proliferation of the Airbnbs and these kind of home sharing things, which are often illegal vacation rentals in residential areas. And so that's actually taking housing stock away from local residents. So it's causing the prices of housing to go up. It's causing conflict in neighborhoods. And so I think we're seeing the other end of this thing, where it's like there's, too much inundation and not enough sort of sense of a way to responsibilize people's behavior, right? Make them more responsible to their local communities when they come and visit. And I'm not sure how we do that. I would love for there to be more places like Ronald's that folks could come and actually do something that was positive and was giving back.
And what is your experience with this? And I guess how do you manage this, and more broadly at Masungi Geo Reserve, how do these kinds of problems of ecological impacts, how are they handled or confronted?
So as far as the sustainability conversation goes, I would say that you can't really talk about genuine sustainability and conservation if you do not know what you're trying to sustain in the places that you are moving in. You definitely have to go that extra stretch, and it will pay back, because engaging scientists, engaging paleontologists, environmentalists will reveal so much about the places that you move in that you didn't know was even there to begin with, right? So for instance, in Masungi, we discovered a new species of snail with the help of some scientists from the academe. And it's now a centerpiece for us when it comes to interpretation. It has influenced the design of a lot of things that we do inside. Our screens in the bathroom, simple things like that, right? Our screens in the bathroom showcase local endemic species of snails. So people do not know that they're getting educated, but that's actually what's happening, right? And it leads to something so unique. So when you look at the place, it might seem like Masungi is just at the backyard of Metro Manila. So whatever species you'll find there are the exact same species, but that's not the case. Landscapes could be very different. Even if it might look like it's the same culture, there are finer details that can be showcased and are worth conserving. and they're worth showcasing, right? It definitely will lead to high value experiences, which millennials and the younger generations totally value.
So I'm interested, and I'll put this one to the group, especially as we pivot next into the final stage of the seminar, where we're talking about solutions and how to be more conscious travelers and explorers. I want to put it to the panel and ask if there's a way that we can navigate. How do we navigate that balance and essentially strike that balance between minimizing the ecological impact of high tourism on the one hand and minimizing the economic impact of low tourism? And I wonder if there's something to be said. Is there a way that we could empower communities or places to be less dependent on tourism, especially in situations where, as we've seen with COVID, if that tourism is taken away, then that economy shuts down with it. To put it to the group, what are your thoughts on how we can strike that balance between ecological impact and economic, I guess, sustainability as well?
COVID has given me an opportunity to look inside my own country and see what's here in both terms of stories to tell, problem to fix, and opportunities to grab. So I see all those and trying to combine them together. After I turn my lens domestically, all I see is trash problems, landfills, lack of technology in trash management. Our canals are full of trash. So I have been making a lot of documentaries regarding this and spreading a lot of awareness according to this and trying to push a lot of regulations. And right now I'm studying in marine plastic solution in master program as well. So I'm going to grab all this and turn it to like a new business that create a trip to follow your trash from your household right to the landfill. And become like, it can create a lot of money. I have surveyed the market, a lot of people interested in it.
Yeah, it was actually kind of similar to what Ronald was saying earlier, how there's this new breed of travelers coming up. And since it's more accessible and we actually see more, for example, sanctuaries where we have more access to them online as well. And that's something that you see here in Thailand a lot. A lot of these sanctuaries and people coming to actually do some good. People don't want to just take a break, but they want to add some value to their life and feel better about themselves. And since they can come for shorter periods of time, it can be sort of a quick break away from work, from this 9-to-5 job. You come and you do something, you help out the community, and you feel better at the same time. You leave a good imprint to where you visited. So yeah, I'm really looking really hopeful with this new breed of tourism.
Just to build on what you're saying, I really like that idea of going with some kind of a purpose. And I was thinking about how the most meaningful trips I've taken were usually when I was invited by a local group that had some sort of purpose for me to go there, where we would meet with people. I would learn about their situation, and then I would also take back certain responsibilities to do work when I go home that would help their efforts, right? Whether it was to education or to do some lobbying for changes in laws and that sort of thing. But having that sort of encounter where it was actually mission driven, to me, made a difference in terms of the value that I got out of it, but also hopefully the impact that I was making.
If I could may suggest, there's an initiative by the Philippines Red Cross where they're looking into something called eco-bricking using plastic. So this is basically plastic bottles they clean out thoroughly, and then they built it into like a house structure. So that's actually another way to kind of utilize one single-use plastic instead of just dumping them everywhere else. And basically in Samoa, we localize tourism now. In saying that, we actually, a lot of the private businesses now look into our diasporas. So we ask them, if you want your families to stay in a hotel, have a nice weekend away from home, not so normal weekend, then you can pay overseas. Like you can do like a card repayment from overseas, and then your families here in Samoa will go utilize this money by staying in the hotel, having a little getaway for the family, and that kind of stuff. So that's actually another way. And like for Samoans, a lot of our people who have lost their jobs because now their business have been run down, a lot of them have gone back to agriculture, and this is where they do subsistence farming, but also some bit of commercial. but majority of them have been kind of, getting back on their feet and getting back to the land where they actually started. So kind of like COVID has actually kind of reminded them of who they really are, and that to go back to where they really started and not just rely and depend solely on the money that we get from tourism.
Being able to travel obviously is such a privilege. And I think it's a privilege that many people do take for granted. Again, I'm going to put this one to the floor, but I'd like to maybe ask you, Kyle, first as a kind of launching off point. What are our responsibilities as travelers? And this will be the kind of closing off question, I guess. What are some things that people need to keep front of mind when they're traveling in terms of their ethical responsibilities?
Boy, there's a lot of responsibilities that comes with that privilege, right? It makes me think of there's a Hawaiian term called kuleana that some of our activists and cultural practitioner friends utilize. And it means both privilege and responsibilities. With privileges comes responsibilities. And so, as someone who has the privilege to travel, exactly this question of what are the responsibilities, what are the relationships that you are fostering when you travel? Is it a one of exploitation, of extraction, or is it one where you are contributing in a way that is building a more just and an ecologically sustainable world? I feel like that's the kind of ethical question at every juncture, whenever you're moving through the world, you have those ethical questions when you make those choices. So I don't know, it's maybe oversimplistic, but I feel like it's that's the kind of that's the tipping point we're at with this planet and the climate crisis we're facing. So yeah, I hope folks will venture in the world with a sense of how to connect and be responsible to those relationships that you're forming.